Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank you for your patience for being here this afternoon. Normally we would do the briefing at 10 o'clock in the morning, however, because the incident happened this morning, we wanted to make sure that we provide accurate information. Before I make any comments, I want to acknowledge Sheriff Jeff Easter, who is the sheriff here in Sedgwick County. He's here with me today. Also, members of the department's command staff. We have Deputy Chief Nelson Mosley, Captain Troy Livingston, who's over crimes against person. We also have Captain Russell Leeds, the commander of our Professional Standards Bureau. We also have Lieutenant Gilmore, who is the new supervisor for the gang felony assault unit, as well as Lieutenant Todd Ojow, the commander of our homicide. We also have Captain Annette Haga with the Sheriff Department. Of course, many of you know Lieutenant Dan East, and of course Captain Doug Nolte. So if I appear a little slow today, it's been a long day. First of all, there again, I want to say thank you for being here. As we know, this morning at Maple and Mount Vernon, we had an officer-involved fatal shooting that occurred this morning. At about 9:29 this morning in the area of 15th and Gow, one of our officers was patrolling that area. He was stopped at a stop sign there at 15th and Gow. And there was another vehicle, a red vehicle that was there that had its left turn signal light on, giving the indication that it was going to make a left-hand turn. The officer also was going to make a left-hand turn, so the officer yielded to allow that driver. However, the driver never did make the turn. For some reason, this driver decides to pull out a flashlight and flash it at the officer for whatever reason. The officer made the decision to contact the gentleman, who is identified as Mr. David M. Ziering, Z-H-R-I-N-G, Ziering. Like I said, he pulled out a flashlight, pointed in the direction of the police officer, which caused him some concern. To make sure that the gentleman was okay, he went over and contacted him. When the officer contacted Mr. Ziering asked the officer what was his name and badge number. And the officer talked to him briefly, and as the officer wanted to ask him, what his name was, he decided he wanted to pull off. So the officer tried to get the tag number of the vehicle that Mr. Ziering was driving. As the officer tried to get the tag number, Mr. Ziering decided to speed off, and the chase was on for the most part. When you look at from the time he left the area of 15th and Gow, he left going southbound, came out on 13th Street, went from 13th Street over to McLean, south on McLean, where it turns into Meridian. During that stretch, speeds had reached a range of 50 miles an hour to about 75 miles an hour. At that time, the officer was assisted by the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office in regards to two of their deputies assisted us with the pursuit. I can tell you that stop sticks were deployed. However, they're on Meridian, but he was able to bypass the stop sticks on Meridian and kept going southbound until he reached the area of Meridian and Maple, where he then went westbound on Maple. We also deployed stop sticks on Maple. At that time, he did run over the stop sticks, and the right front driver's tire is the one that ran over those stop sticks. During this chase, Mr. Ziering, for some unknown reason, placed his flashlight outside of the driver's side window and was flashing it back at the officer. We don't know why he was doing that. And you can draw your own conclusions, but we don't know why he made that decision to put his flashlight out and shine it in the direction of the police officer that was pursuing him. Once Mr. Ziering turned from Maple onto Mount Carmel, he quickly stopped his vehicle along the east curb. Once he stopped that vehicle, within seconds, he opens the door in stride. As he's walking towards the police officer, he's reaching in his jacket with his right hand. He comes out with the knife. He uses his left hand to open up this knife, so now you have an exposed blade as he's approaching the police officer as well as sheriff deputies that were behind him. The first officer that he approached with that knife out was originally our officer, and as he was coming towards our officer, the sheriff's deputy discharged their taser in the direction of Mr. Ziering. However, Mr. Ziering was able to withstand the initial taser, and then he directed his attention to another deputy who also fired his taser. There again, Mr. Ziering, for whatever reason, was able to not go down with those two different bursts of tasers. And so as he is pursuing the second deputy, that's when the officer fired multiple rounds, because he was a threat not only to the original deputy, our officer, but also the other deputy that he was pursuing. Once he was shot, he did go down. He was transported to Ville Christi St. Francis Hospital, where at about 3:08 he died of his gunshot wounds. During the time that Mr. Ziering got out of the vehicle, our officer was just parking his vehicle and trying to get out. Things evolved so quick. Like I said, you're talking from the time he left his vehicle to the time he was in front of our police officer's vehicle, you're talking about less than 5 seconds, I would say. And so the officer was really trying to come out of there as quickly as he could, take off his seatbelt, as well as pull his gun out, all in one motion to protect himself. And so that's one of the things that we had a chance to see. Once we were able to handcuff Mr. Ziering, we also saw that he had a second knife. I mean, we saw the one knife that was in his right pocket, but he also was in possession of another knife that was discovered once he was taken into custody. The officer that was involved is a 3-year veteran of the department. His career started in 2011, which is customary. He's going to be placed on administrative leave. This is a joint investigation with the Kansas Bureau of Investigations, as well as the District Attorney's Office, and also the Wichita Police Department. One of the things you're often concerned about is if the Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputies had not been there, could it had a negative outcome for this organization, because the gentleman was so aggressive. I can tell you that we also recovered additional knives inside of his vehicle as well. One of them was a 16-inch sword that was in the back seat. He had another knife down in the console. There was another knife on the right front floorboard inside of that vehicle. So why does he have all those knives? We'll never know. But I can tell you that we're fortunate we did not have a law enforcement officer either injured or killed in the line of duty because of the actions of Mr. Ziering. So that is the quick overview. As far as, keep in mind, this is a preliminary investigation. We still have work to do, but it was important for us to provide some information to our community in regards to what happened this morning at Maple and Mount Carmel. So I'll entertain questions. Pardon me?
Do you have an age for the victim?
Yes. He's 30 years old. His first name is David, Mr. David M. Ziering. His date of birth is 8/29 of 1983. He lives here in the city of Wichita.
Spell his last name one more time, sir.
Zehring.
The vehicle that was referenced in the 911 tape talked about a house on Gowdy. He lived there, or was the vehicle stolen?
He lived in the 1600 block of Gow.
Okay. And I wanted to clarify from your narrative, did the officer approach him before he actually, while they were kind of waiting to make the turn, or what he thought would be a turn, and this was not after the chase had begun, it was prior to any of the pursuit?
It was prior. Like I said, they both had their left turn signals on, so the officer was yelling to Mr. Ziering because he was going southbound. And so there at the intersection, Mr. Ziering made a decision to flash his flashlight in the direction of the officer, which is kind of unusual to do that and draw attention to yourself. And so the officer, being a good officer that he is, wanted to follow up to see what was going on. Was he all right? Was he under the influence of any kind of narcotics? So just part of good police work.
I'm sorry, were they both planning to turn left from the same
The officer was going north, and Mr. Ziering was going south, and they were both looking at turning left. One to go eastbound, the other to go westbound.
Where were the deputies in relation to the police officers' car on Mount Carmel, next to Maple?
They were close proximity. I mean, you had our vehicle, then you had the two Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputies' vehicles right behind our vehicle.
So just to clarify, he got out of the car with a knife already pulled, and that's when he pursued officers on foot.
When he got out of the car, he didn't have anything in his hand. As he got in the front of the police car, he reaches into his right pocket of his jacket, comes out, and you can see him opening the blade of the knife, and he's got it up this way, moving towards our officers. And because the deputy fired their taser, it drew his attention to the sheriff deputy, and then that's when the other sheriff deputy used his taser, and it drew his attention to him, and then subsequently we had to shoot him.
So he got out of the car, tased, and he was tased twice? Those hit him. They didn't miss him.
The first one hit him, and the second one, well, both of them hit him, but they just, for some reason, he just was able to resist going down. I mean, he's close to 6'3", about 300 pounds. He had on a jacket, and so if you have on a jacket or clothing that is thick enough where you don't penetrate, then that's going to affect the effectiveness of the taser.
And he continued going after the second deputy when the officer fired, correct?
Yes. When he started after the second deputy, that's when our officer fired from his duty weapon.
And he was the only one to fire?
He was the only one to fire.
Do we know how many shots were fired at this time?
Multiple shots were fired.
Did this officer have a body cam?
No, the officer did not have a body cam.
Was there a dash cam that was able to view?
The Sedgwick County Sheriff's vehicles did have dash cams. That's why we were able to see exactly what happened during the chase, as well as during the subsequent confrontation between Mr. Ziering and our personnel.
That the police vehicle did not?
No.
Just a couple more questions, folks.
Just so I can confirm, I'm sorry. Can you tell me what time this whole situation started?
2:29 a.m. today.
Just so I-
Sheriff Easter, would you make any comments as far as your deputies are?
Being that the deputies were assisting on this with the chase, actually one of the deputies is listed as a victim in the aggravated battery on this. Fortunately for us, they're both going on days off, so they're not placed on administrative leave. They'll be on their 2 days off, and then we'll assess them when they come back to work their next work day. So basically, that's all I have. We were fortunate that nobody was hurt, and that the deputies were in such close proximity of when the officer had to take the action that he did. So if there's any questions of me, go right ahead.
I was just curious if the suspect had any prior criminal history or anything.
Actually, he did have, but nothing major, just misdemeanor types of violations, according to what we've been able to determine as far as his criminal history. There's no major type of criminal action. I think he had a DUI in 2004. 2006, he had a possession of drug paraphernalia. There was an aggravated assault case in 2012, but it was pled to a misdemeanor. So that's all that we really show.
One interesting additional piece to that we found out through a neighboring county is approximately about a year ago, they had responded to a disturbance between two family members. Mr. Ziering was one of them. When they went inside the residence, they did seize 53 weapons from him, handguns and other type of rifles and shotguns. So there was some information about him out there from Butler County. That's why we have the intelligence databases that we do, and we have to do a better job of relaying that information. We weren't aware of that until we looked up his information.
That was a year ago?
Yes.
I heard on the 911 call that either a dispatcher or the officer pursuing him said he may be armed. Was there something that he saw or did, Mr. Ziering, that gave that indication, or did he perhaps mistake the flashlight for a weapon?
I think because of his actions, there again, we'll never know, because the officer didn't really say why he put that information. Because the officer did put information, he may be armed. Originally, the officer thought he might have been a security officer, and so if he thought he was being a security officer, then sometimes they're armed, sometimes they're not. And so he made that decision based on what he saw, based on the actions of Mr. Zeri.